Hello everyone. Hope you all having a good day. Myself Astra Shah and I am your host for today's session. I welcome all of you on behalf of the Hack the Mountains team. Today marks the 11th session under our HTM QuBits initiative. For those who don't know about qubits, let me brief you about it. So HTM QuBits hosts a series of workshops where you can learn about different technologies from scratch or even brush up your skills for your hackathon idea. So now let me introduce to you to our speaker, Aditya Thakur, who is a developer advocate at 100 MS and a Flutter developer as well. He is also the builder in chief of a short video learning app that teaches skills in life for life in 30 seconds. His goal is to empower and inspire developers and learners to create impactful and innovative solutions using technology. Hello, Aditya. It's so nice to have you here. The stage is all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Excited to be here today. I'll just quickly share my screen. Awesome. I hope my screen is visible. Thank you so much for having me for this qubit session here at Hack the Mountains. A little bit about me again. I am currently working as developer advocate at 100 MS. I create content in my free time. I have around 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. With that, I also have a Discord community majorly of Flutter developers and have previously been a speaker at Flutter Vikings, Google I/O Extended New Delhi, and events here and there. Um, Other than that, I contribute to open source. So I have been a contributor to the official Flutter repository, the Flutter Community Plus plugins, and the Flutter Fire, which is the implementation for Firebase in Flutter repository as well. So this was the Flutter framework commit that I had recently worked on. It was a shader marks example thing that I got to fix. And other than that, I want to talk about Flutter because it's like a really great framework, especially if you are in university, if you are in your college right now, or if you're trying to build a project for hackathon. So throughout this session, we'll talk about what is Flutter, how can you get started with it. I'll quickly show you how easy it is to write code using Flutter, and why did I get started with it, and more such reasons. So one particular reason that interests me is like a lot of things that you do today are majorly done on your mobile phone. So let us say you are browsing, like if you want to keep in touch with your friends or family, there are social apps that you generally access through your mobile phone. If you have to book flight tickets, there are apps that you can use on a mobile phone. There are also websites, but a lot of people prefer to have an app downloaded, manage everything there. And a lot of time that you spend on a mobile phone is generally in these applications that we have running on our mobile device. So generally, it becomes essential that we have people who build these applications. When you think about building apps, there are generally two major platforms that you have to target. There is Android. A lot of people here in India have Android devices, and there is also iOS. Like a few people have iOS. In other countries like USA, Apple devices are majorly used. So these two frameworks need to be targeted. Now, when it comes to becoming an app developer, you can choose to, either go natively, work on one platform, build an application. But the problem is, like, if you build out an application using Java or Kotlin, it would only work on your Android device, and it can only be shipped to Play Store. So if you want more people to use your application, you would have to again learn another framework, learn another language, build your application for maybe iOS, and ship it again to App Store where other people can download it for their devices. I had this problem when I was just starting out because I was in my second year when I wanted to build an application for a mental health club on campus. I initially thought I would go with Kotlin, learn it, and build out the application. The problem again was a few of my friends had iOS devices. They also wanted to test the application out. Also, we had like smaller things that we needed to do, like maybe build out like a landing page where people can sign up before they download the application and then use it. So this is where Flutter comes in. What Flutter majorly does, it's like a framework provided by Google, built on like, it's a framework by Google that lets you build out these applications for more than one platform. So if you are trying to build like apps for mobile, Android, iOS, you can use Flutter. If you are trying to build web apps, you can again use Flutter. Even if you want to build out like uh, desktop applications for Windows, Mac OS, or Linux, you can use Flutter. So those are like six different platforms that you can build for, and that is the topic of the session. We'll be talking about how can you get started working with Flutter, how can you build out these applications for all these different platforms. Now, when I first time tell people that you can build out for these six different platforms, they think that you have to individually write code for all these different platforms. So with Flutter, what it does, it makes it really easy for you to do that. What I'll do is I'll quickly take you through the process. Uh, So Flutter.dev is the official website for the Flutter framework. They have a few examples listed here, but what we are majorly looking for is this get started button to take us through the installation steps and how you can set it up. Before we dive into that, quickly again about Flutter open source framework, you can view the code on GitHub. It lets you build out these applications for multiple platforms, which are the same platforms that I talked about. Application like for Android or iOS, for web, and even desktop apps. It's very fast. You can quickly write code. You can see the changes as you are doing that. Then it also makes you a bit more productive because of some of the features like hot reload, and it's very flexible with how you can adapt to UIs on screen. You can control every pixel on screen, and you can reach more users. So it's generally preferred by startups that are trying to build out their MVP or product, and they want to quickly test out with a lot of users, so they can use Flutter for that. And back here, like at home, it's used by a number of companies. Zerodha uses Flutter for their Kite application. We'll also talk about their journey in the next slides. But if you have used Google Pay, the latest versions use Flutter, and a lot of the other applications like BMW, my BMW app is built using Flutter. Alibaba uses Flutter. Philips Hue application to control the lights and everything, it's also built out using Flutter. So a lot of applications in production use it already. What we want to do is get started with how we can install it depending on the operating system that you're on. If you have a Windows device, you'll have to download the zip file, extract it, add it to your path. Similarly, on Mac OS, there are the different for Intel or Apple Silicon chip, two different builds available that you can download and unzip it, add it to the path, and then run Flutter Doctor. So for this, you can watch a dedicated video uh, to install Flutter on your system, depending on whatever system you are on. I have Flutter already installed, so I can open up the terminal on my device and navigate to my desktop. So once I'm here, I can run the Flutter create command with the name of the project. So maybe I'll call this new project, and I can hit enter. It should run a few things for me and create a new Flutter project. So this takes some time, but it will write 129 files for us. And if you'll see here, like there will be a new folder created with the project name, and you can open it to view all the different files that are available. Now let us also open it in a code editor of our choice. So I'll navigate to new project. Okay. I generally like to use VS Code for Flutter development, but if you are on, if like if you want to, you can also use Android Studio, and I generally recommend Android Studio for beginners because it's easier to debug a few things. It's easier to set up Android emulators and more such with Android Studio. So I would recommend if you are like a beginner who's just starting out to use that. And if you want to build out for iOS, you would need Xcode installed on your device. So I have it here on my Mac. And like, let's talk about Flutter. Come back to it. So what we see is like when we open a new Flutter project, there are a few folders created for us. So there is the Android folder, there is an iOS folder, a Linux, a Mac OS, and similarly like Windows, web, and all the 6 platforms that you can build for are available here inside this project directory. Now, to answer the question that I had previously mentioned, when working with Flutter, you do not have to work on these different platforms individually. Like if I want to build an Android and iOS app, I don't have to write code for Android and iOS both like in the folders. All I have to do is go down to the lib folder and write all the code that I want inside this lib folder. Flutter would take this code and it would build for the different platforms, so you don't have to worry about what's going on under the hood, under the hood there. And all you have to do is like write down your code in the lib folder inside different Dart files. So you notice like there is the .dart extension. The language that we use to write code in Flutter is the Dart programming language. I'll talk more about it. And what I would also like to add to my previous statement is if you are working for like Android and let us say there are some files that you want to add natively, so you can also do that in Flutter. So let us say there is something you want to access natively, like you're working on a payment gateway, you want to have some native functions called, so you can do that using by modifying the code inside this Android directory. There are permissions that you can add to the Android app build.gradle. Not permissions, but you can like update application ID and minimum SDK version. Permissions you can add under source main Android manifest. So all these different options are available. So you can both, if you want to access the native side of things, and call that using Flutter. And if you do not want to go into that, you just have to write code inside the lib folder. That is all you have to do. The code that is written inside the lib folder is generally in a programming language called Dart. Dart is the programming language we work with in Flutter, and it is very easy to get started with. So again, just like with Flutter, we'll also explore the Dart.dev website. If you have done programming in the past, like if you've worked with C, C++, or Java, Dart should appear very familiar. Um, in fact, like you can go over to the docs tab here and go down to the language tour. So the language tour has a simple code walkthrough of how do you work with Dart. Generally, if you want to print out something, you can just type in print and pass in the string or something that you want to print out, and it will do that for you, much like how it's done in Python. And it has these braces much like Java. So this is how you create a variable in Dart. You can type in, use the var keyword, type in the name, variable name, and give it a value. And there is like a lot of other things that you might have to, you if you are a experienced developer, you can just follow along the dart.dev documentation, or if you are a student developer, you can quickly watch a video. There are tutorials on how to get started with Dart. Or if you take up like a Flutter course, generally most of these courses cover introduction to Dart and all the steps associated with it, so you do not have to worry. Everything we'll do in this workshop would be like very simple to follow. So I'll also explain you the Dart code that we are working with, so it makes sense. Um, Let's come back to the presentation again. So we have talked about like what Flutter is. We have talked about the different platforms it supports. We have created a new Flutter project where I majorly wanted to show that there are different folders created, but you do not have to like worry about those. You can write code inside the lib folder. We talked about the programming language that it uses, which is the Dart programming language. So more than that, you can also use Flutter on embedded devices. There is a really cool example done by Roman, who is a Google developer expert for Flutter. So he built out this ID card that uses Flutter. So if you are at a conference, you would have like an interactive ID card display. There are examples that are built out for Wear OS. So it's the operating system which is inside your watches, like the Android watches. So Wear OS, there is this game created by Renan where he shows like how you can use Flame Engine with Flutter to build games and also run it on your watch. So there are a lot of cool examples available out there. We have already seen Flutter create a new project or new app in action. This is the command that we use to create a new project. So we type in Flutter create followed by the project name to create a new Flutter project. Now let's come to the crash course. How can you work with Flutter? How does it? How do you write code in Flutter, and how do you do that? So in Flutter, everything is a widget. If you are coming from web development, it might be familiar, like components are something that you use in React. Similarly, we have widgets in Flutter that we use. Let us say you are a mobile developer, you are trying to build out an application for Android and iOS, and this is your empty canvas screen. So you will have like a blank mobile screen that you have to build out something on. You're told by your manager or supervisor to add some text. So how would that be done in Flutter? It's really simple. You just have to type in the name of the widget that you are trying to use. In this case, there are like widgets built by the team available. So we can just type in text, which takes in a string value, hello Aditya, and then you can close the brackets. Flutter would take this text widget and render it on screen for you. So you'll be able to actually see the code inside your Flutter mobile app. Similarly, let us say you're now told to add an image. What we want to do is like we want to, as a Flutter developer, know all the widgets that are available to use. So we can go down to the documentation, and here you will see a widgets catalog available. This widgets catalog has a list of all the available widgets that you can use inside your mobile applications, depending on what you're trying to do. So in our case, we wanted to add like an image to our screen. So there is an assets, images, and icon widgets um, documentation section available. This has the image widget option here that you can quickly use. So you can type in image, pass in the value that you want to show. So if there is a link that you want to pass in, or if there is a asset image, like a image that you have dropped inside your project files, you can do either of those, and that way you will be able to add an image. So the answer to this would be simply typing in image, giving it the value. So in our case, we want to use a network image or from a URL, so we can pass in that, and it would show that image on screen for us. Similarly, you can build out more complex UIs. Like if you are familiar with WhatsApp, you'll see like a lot of elements on top of, like inside your application are repeating. Like you have the chats going down in a list, but all of them have the same component. So there is the name of the chat, or like the name of the group that you have created, and then there is the last message that shows up, the time, and if it's like pinned, there would be an icon here or nothing here. And then there are the profile images, like the group images, or the user that you're talking to, and this goes on repeating one under the other. So you can create similar experiences in Flutter. What we have is a app bar on top. Then we have some repeating elements. There is also a tab bar, but this might be a bit complex for beginners. But then we have like the repeating elements that go one under the other in a list view. And then you have a floating action button that you can use to create like a new chart. So Flutter allows you to also lay out the different widgets. Like we saw in our WhatsApp example, there is a parent widget, and then there are some children widgets that are repeating throughout. You can have like a single child widget. Some widgets only allow one child, whereas some widgets have like a list of multiple childrens that you can pass to them. One such layout widget is the column widget. What it does is basically takes in a list of these widgets, and then you can pass in that list and it would render the text like flutter, crash, course on screen one under the other. There is also a row widget that lets you put these different children's like on the side of one another, like in a horizontal view. And you can find all these widgets again inside the widgets catalog section on the Flutter documentation. If you go down to UI widgets and check out layout, you'll find like a lot of different layout widgets to place everything on screen depending on how you want it. There are the column and the row widgets that we talked about just now. So row basically lets you do it horizontally, one after the other in a line, and column lets you take them one under the other vertically. So widgets catalog is like an important part of the documentation that we have to go through. Summarize quickly what we have talked about now is Flutter is all about the widgets. We can write the name of the widget that we want to use, pass in the value, and it will render that on screen for us. You do not have to learn all these widgets. Generally, as you work on more projects, as you build out a few more things, you'll know like what you want to do and how to do it. You can always refer the Flutter widgets documentation on their website to find something. Like if you do not know what to use here, you can always Google it. So that is there. And yeah, Flutter like makes it really easy to build out these UIs in our default application itself. Like if we try to run it now, you can select a device. Right now I have Mac OS as option because this is a Mac device. Then there is Chrome. I can run it as a web app, or I can launch an iOS simulator or like a mobile Android emulator to run this application on. I'll quickly do Chrome because it would be easier, but I could also do it as a Mac OS web app, Mac OS app, sorry. When I run this application, you will see like the default UI that Flutter comes with. There are also like inside this default project, there are also like comments added to make it easier to navigate through the code here. Um, let's wait for this to launch quickly. All right. So this is the Flutter demo homepage that a new Flutter application comes up with. There is a floating action button, just like we saw in the Flutter layout. That when you click on this, it quickly increments the number on screen. So if you will scroll through code, you'll see like there is this text widget that we have seen added here. So if I make some space. So you'll see like this text widget is added here, which says you have pushed the button this many times, and this text also shows up inside our application. I can quickly change this, like maybe hello world. Save this file, and you'll see like the changes are applied almost instantaneously because of the hot reload feature available in Flutter. So if I were to minimize this, bring it almost together so that it is also visible, and change it to something else like crash course, you'll see like nothing happens. As soon as I save this file, it builds it again, and you see like the changes appear here. So you can quickly write code, see the changes that you have done, to see like how it looks on the mobile application, and it makes it really easy to build out UIs quickly. You can type in something quickly, see how it looks, and you can be more productive as such. So again, another reason why a lot of Flutter developers work with Flutter is also because of the community support available. So as I had already mentioned, we also have a Discord community where we talk about Flutter. But there are a lot of people right now here in India who have been working with Flutter, who are like building applications using it. So there are often like events that are happening. You can always meet these people in person. You can ask questions, like if there is a Flutter problem that you run into, you can uh, reach out to one of the GDs or someone who has worked with it previously. Ask them the question; they'll be happy to help. These are like some of the images from the past few events that I have attended around Flutter. Like there was the Flutter Conf India and more. So let's talk about the companies that use Flutter quickly. So there is Zerodha, which has the Kite application built out in Flutter. We also had a community session with one of the developers on the Zerodha team, and they manage billions of transactions, but they only have a team of three people doing the application side of things, which is marvelous to think of, because a few developers too can build out that level of scalable applications. What they did was they had initially started out with a native application on Android, but they also wanted to have like iOS users use it. They moved to React Native, but it didn't work out for them that well, so they started using Flutter while I think it was still in beta. So they have been using it since. Their major application that is that manages all these transactions, requires all the securities built out in Flutter. There are other applications available that use Flutter. This is like a old comparison, might not be relevant as such in 2023. uh, Again, it's not about like building applications. Generally with Flutter, there are advantages to like reusing your business logic. So let us say there is a add to number function that you have added to your Android application. Now when you're also building an iOS app, you might have to do that all over again, but with Flutter, that underlying business logic would remain similar across platforms. So you can focus on UI changes, like making your UI more adaptive. uh, like for iOS, you can use adaptive iOS dialogues. These alert dialogues are available in the latest version, which is I think Flutter 3.13. So they have made adaptive dialogues available, and you can do all these UI changes that make your application UI much better for the platform, and reuse the business logic that is there. So this is like a this is more about the frameworks architecture here. We talked about widgets already. There are like material for Android and Cupertino for iOS available. Um, Under the hood, Flutter uses the Skia engine. Right now, what they're doing is they're writing a engine of their own to help with this, which should be available soon. Like it's available on iOS to try out, but it should be available for Android in a few, I think, months to use there as well. Um, I talked about how you can, also access native functions. So there is the Android and iOS method channels available that you can use to run a function that you want on the Android side, use it in Flutter, or on iOS side and use that in Flutter as well. Finally, I think let's talk about the UI projects that you can do when you're trying to learn Flutter. So since it's like a somewhat more front end focused framework, I'll recommend starting out with learning how can you lay out these widgets on screen. So how can you build out these UIs on screen. So like taking a big application like Netflix, trying to clone it yourself in Flutter or following a tutorial online would help with that. If you have ideas of your own, or if you like look up designs on Dribble and Behance and try to build them out using Flutter, that would also be practice enough. Then you can try out maybe building out applications that also require some native side of things to be done, like a music player for audio integration, or to access like the local device files on Android and play those inside the music player. Then work with APIs, try to build an application that uses an API. It could be as simple as using like a free jokes API, show it inside your Flutter application. It would teach you about like how can you parse the data received from the API and also show it on application and all that stuff. Then we have applications you can build out using a database. This would require you to perform the crude operations like create, read, update, delete data, and other features on Firebase that you can use like remote config analytics. So there are a lot of these options available. Firebase is somewhat easier to set up with Flutter. Like you can quickly use the CLI to set up a Firebase project. There are also alternatives to Firebase available like Supabase, AppWrite. You can build a custom backend using Node.js. And you can also use like SQLite and more such databases with your Flutter applications. So then you would have to learn a bit about state management, how you can manage data across your Flutter application. This would require you to use some external packages, maybe like Provider, Riverpod, or Block. I don't recommend GetX as such, but it's like the most liked package. Although for the last 15 months it hasn't seen a new update, so I wouldn't recommend it as such. But yeah, the other few options are pretty good. So for this, you can build out an e-commerce application to, you know, learn much more about state management. Also to add like payment integration to your Flutter applications. Build a game with Flutter. There is the Flame engine available. There are Flutter game toolkits available that you can use to quickly build out like a game, casual game with Flutter. And finally, to quickly talk about all the different internships or like what is the future prospects with Flutter. The first is like the common question that I get is if you were to learn Flutter, like you can build out all these different applications for all these different platforms. One reason why I recommend it for hackathons is generally because you will have more frameworks available to showcase. So let us say like someone comes in, they have built out a web app, but using Flutter you can build out mobile applications as well as like desktop apps to demo it along with your to demo it as like possible outcomes of a project, which is really cool. Um, Talking about like future prospects, if you were to learn Flutter in your university years, you can find a job as a Flutter developer. To get your first role, how do you find your first role? I would recommend like building out projects with Flutter, putting them, sharing them to your socials, and connecting with other Flutter developers. As they discover you more, they are more likely to offer you roles at their organization. This is what I did when I was initially starting out. Um, I got my first paid internship through a friend who knew like I was working with Flutter, and he knew a company that was hiring, and they connected me, and that is how like I got my first paid internship. But companies hire a lot of companies here in India use Flutter. So like few of them are like earlier startups. Most of them are earlier startups, but there are also like established companies that use Flutter. I think Cred was recently hiring for Flutter developers. There are other companies like Zerota itself uses, but they hire rarely because their 3% team is able to manage everything. Um, there are companies like I'll have to look them up, but I had written a piece about Flutter companies that hire in India. Also, like I have seen companies like I think Infosys and TCS put out Flutter rules, so I might have links to those on my Discord server. But generally, a lot of companies would be available when you start looking out for these roles. is it feasible to work full time as a Flutter developer? Like I know I have a few friends who have like good packages, who are working with Flutter companies around Delhi NCR, startups there, building out their application using Flutter. They get paid same as much as any other software developer. So yeah, it's definitely feasible. Then I think to conclude this session, I have prepared like a few resources for anyone interested to learn Flutter. Uh, they are available on go.learnflutter.in, so you can access this. It is like a Notion doc uh, with a few free Flutter courses. So there is one by Rivan on YouTube available that has like Dart and Flutter complete guide in 20 hours. There is also one free by Vandad, who is a Flutter GDE, and he has like a whole playlist complete with state management and everything for you to learn Flutter. And then I also have a free course on Flutter. There are a few project ideas like how you can build out a portfolio website in Flutter, or how you can find these internships and more. And finally, links to Discord and Telegram. The Telegram has Flutter jobs and internships, which is where like I put out roles that I come across in Flutter development. And lastly, if you have any questions, I would be happy to take them up. I am available on Twitter if you have any questions, or on LinkedIn with the username Aditya Thakur XD. I have my YouTube channel and also the Discord that you can join for any questions related to Flutter now, or like later on when you're working with it as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Aditya. Like your explanation was like on the point, and anyone with little coding knowledge can also understand that. So we have our first question. That do you have any tips for keeping a Flutter code clean? Because having a common code base and there are so many widget templates that it seriously becomes hard for me to debug the code.
Generally, like what I did, what happens is like when you're working on a bigger Flutter project, it also depends on how you structure your folders in the long run. So there are a few folder structure examples available. There are different ways to do it. How I like to do it is like separate out my UIs. So there is a screens folder that has like components. Some people like to create individual widgets and put them inside. Like if there is a home screen, then it will have home, the widgets associated with it, and the different screen UIs also. Definitely, like if you can try to give out every widget its own file, but like some widgets, like they, if they are a lot of interdependent widgets, they could all be in the same file. Then I think it all comes down to I think with Flutter it's relatively easier to access like the different files. Like if you click on a widget with command, you go to it, you can quickly see what is happening there. With a few other frameworks that I've been recently working with, it's a bit more difficult to find that. Since Flutter is also open source, you can go to the Flutter code also and see what is happening under the hood as well. So yeah, I would say like a bit more study on folder structure. There are a few written guides available by, I think there is one by Code with Andrea, who has written one on folder structure as well. So you can check that out. Abhishek Doshi has a guide on Flutter folder structure also. He has a video, I guess. So yeah, these are a few tips.
Okay. Also, like is Flutter only for front-end purposes or does it cover the backend as well?
Flutter is a, like for a long time it was called the UI toolkit. It's majorly front end focused. You can manage a lot of things with the backend in the code itself. So you can create calls to server there. You can manage the data that is coming in, but it is definitely a bit more front end focused. So yeah, would be
True.
wrong to call it
Uh,
UI kit right now. It's like more
mhm.
of a frame. Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Also, as someone from a non-tech background or someone who has no like knowledge of coding, Is there like any prerequisite or any other language that you should know before you start with Flutter, or you can just directly start with it?
Yeah, not as such. Like if you do not know any other coding language, if you jump directly into that, like it's a very easy programming language to go with. You learn that, you start working with Flutter framework, or you just follow a Flutter ka course. It would cover all the Dart concepts that you require. So no, it isn't as much of a problem. And I know a lot of developers who hadn't like previously done anything, and they moved to Flutter by taking up like a Udemy course or following tutorials online. There is a very cool story about this one person who used to like, I know him from Twitter. He used to initially be a driver, then he followed a few tutorials. Now he's a Flutter developer, working remotely and earning a lot more than before. So yeah, that is there. There are also no code tools available that you can use. So there is Flutter Flow. That is a drag and drop tool. You can drag and drop elements for any startup founders that want to quickly ship out their applications. So that is available as well.
So that makes sense. Thank you for that. So, do you have any more questions? Okay, so I don't think we have any more questions. So, thank you so much, Aditya. The session was really helpful. I don't know anything about Flutter, but yeah, I understand like almost everything you said, like 80% of the things. Uh, so yeah, it was really helpful, and thank you for explaining everything precisely, as well as uh, with bit more emphasis on important parts as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful.
Yeah.